Where's my baby? Where is my baby? Where is my baby? A woman in a long black dress screams to tourists in Wright Square in Savannah, Georgia. It's late at night. They just wanted to go for a walk. Maybe they should call the police? They quickly dial the number. There's a woman in Wright Square. She says she's looking for her baby. I'm not sure if she's okay. I think she needs help. Dispatch reaches out to officers, and the nearest car rolls his eyes as he mutes the radio and looks at his partner. Alice is out again. You see those dips in the brick? Tour guide asks. The dips are where the coffins this sidewalk is paved over have collapsed under the weight of the bricks. The group shifts further toward the street, away from the brick sidewalk closest to the cemetery. Colonial Park Cemetery has been there since 1789, believed to hold 10,000 bodies, many in unmarked graves. In fact, one mass grave has the bodies of exactly 666 people who died from yellow fever. The plaque of their memorial simply stated, nearly 700 buried here. Well, that's the bodies in the cemetery now anyways. It used to be much bigger, expanding blocks in each direction, but those bodies now support the streets. Their bones have become the foundation that won't let Savannah sink. Wait, look at that. What was that? Look at the door. Investigators roll back the film. Through a closed door materializes and sprints a shadow across the balcony section, what used to be the blacks-only section. They watch it again. The apparition is barely taller than the railing. Is that Ben? Someone asks. Ben? Who's Ben? The second fire, 1948. His father was an usher for the balcony area. When the fire happened, they forgot to unlock the entrance that the black attendees used. It was at the bottom of that stairwell. Ben got caught in the crowd and he was trampled to death. His father is up there too. He died from smoke inhalation trying to get to Ben. Brick sidewalks and beautiful, beautiful quiet squares. Antebellum houses create the perfect backdrop for a story written by Edgar Allan Poe. Spanish moss that feels like a fairy dream in the daytime and a vampiric haunt at night. Today's episode of Highway to Hell is going to be a little bit different. We're diving into the history and the hauntings of Savannah, Georgia. We're going to discuss a brief history of the city, the most haunted city in the U.S., some of its most famous hauntings, and people, including myself, real encounters with these hauntings. Let's hit the road to Savannah and maybe find a portal to hell itself on today's episode of Highway to Hell. Hello, and welcome back to Highway to Hell. I'm Monty Mader, and I will be your host today. Thank you all so much again for the great comments, reviews, and subscribers to the podcast with last week's Denver episode. It's been doing really well. And actually, the St. Louis episode is quickly becoming the favorite episode so far. So I'm excited to see what you think about Savannah. I'm super just deeply grateful for anyone who takes the time to listen. It's been a really fun project for me. Lots of work and a lot of fun too, but I appreciate the support. I'm extremely excited about today's episode. And if you're watching on YouTube, this outfit was inspired by American Horror Story's Coven season. I was like, ooh, we're doing spooky stuff, so I'm going to dress real witchy-like. So that's the vibe for today. This was my first time in Savannah, and I had an incredible time. It's such a beautiful historical and spooky city, and oh my god, the food there is, oh my god, I have so much in the travel section to talk about with the food. I'm also going to give the first book recommendation associated with the city. That's going to come later. Today we're going to discuss a brief history of the city of Savannah and some of my favorite hauntings in Savannah, my personal experiences in those places, as well as some of the experiences of others, including I did an overnight paranormal lock-in in the Savannah Theater. Buckle up, kids. We are on a very dark and spooky highway today in Savannah, Georgia. Very special thank you to my friend Kyle, who's letting me crash in his studio room and use it. And there's like spooky coffins behind me and skulls everywhere. It's the best setting I could have chosen for this episode. Super thankful, super thankful. People have been so gracious this month, hosting me, helping me figure out this lifestyle. I'm actually strongly considering renting out my apartment on a full-time basis and renting a room somewhere for my shit and continuing to travel and do this podcast for the time being. But anyways, sorry, little sidetrack. We're going to go into the history of Savannah. Savannah was established by General James Edward Oglethorpe, who founded Georgia, the 13th colony of the United States, on February 12, 1722. Georgia was named after England's King George II. Oglethorpe arrived as the leader of a group of 120 English settlers aboard the ship Anne. Oglethorpe was a social reformer in England and saw the new colony as a chance for the poor and indebted of Britain to start anew. Savannah, as the first settlement of the Georgia colony, was strategically placed to serve as a buffer against Spanish Florida to the south. The city was planned with a unique system of streets and public squares, which has largely been preserved to this day. Savannah is a necropolis. Much of the city is paved over old cemeteries, including ancient burial grounds, and as the city began to expand, there was less and less room for the dead. Oglethorpe's plan included a 24 park-like squares. 22 of those 24 survive today, many of which are built over mass graves. Beyond the causes of death that marred humanity in the 17 and 1800s, Savannah was also caught in the middle of two major wars and two yellow fever outbreaks. One of those outbreaks was so deadly that 1 in 6 people in the city died. The squares also provided a barrier to the destroyer of cities at the time, fire. By slowing down a fire's advance, the chances of containment increased. This design in these squares, however, contributed to the city's orderly growth and remains a hallmark of Savannah's design. During the American Revolutionary War, Savannah was a key strategic point. In 1778, British forces captured the city. The Siege of Savannah in 1779 was an attempt by the French and American forces to retake the city, but it ended in failure. Savannah remained under British control until 1782, 1 year before victory by American forces in 1783. While Savannah survived the devastation from the war, it was soon ravaged by a deadly fire in 1796 that left much of the city needing to be rebuilt from the ashes. After the Revolutionary War, Savannah flourished as a port city. The invention of the cotton gin by Eli Whitney in nearby Chatham County revolutionized the processing of cotton and contributed to the prosperity of the city through the cotton industry. It was the wealth of cotton that established the wealth in Savannah that built these lavish mansions you see around the city and that we'll explore later today. The cotton gin was the beginning of Savannah's old money. The ease of shipping brought in commerce from the northern U.S., Europe, and the Caribbean. It also became a hub for the slave trade, as many slave ships came to port in both Savannah and New Orleans. This era also saw the construction of many of Savannah's iconic antebellum homes, buildings, and mansions, reflecting its wealth and cultural investment in this period. In 1820, the first major outbreak of yellow fever ravaged Savannah, taking 1 in every 6 citizens to an early grave. Many of Savannah's mass graves are a result of this outbreak because they did not have the time or the space to bury each body individually. 1820 was also the year of Savannah's second devastating fire, leaving the city in ruins and much, much emptier. Savannah was rebuilt and it flourished, and it became a significant location during the Civil War, again due to the strategic port. In December of 1864, General William Tecumseh Sherman ended his march to the sea by capturing Savannah without significant destruction. I use capture loosely. The mayor of Savannah had sent word to General Sherman that he would surrender the city under the condition that the Union forces would not burn it down. The offer was accepted and is the reason that Savannah did not receive significant damage during the Civil War. Sherman offered the city to President Abraham Lincoln as a Christmas gift. The end of the Civil War led to a challenging period of reconstruction with significant social and economic adjustments, including the integration of freed slaves into society. Savannah, like much of the South, resisted emancipation by using Jim Crow laws, deep racial segregation, and prohibiting freed slaves from owning property and operating within certain realms of business. This segregation and discrimination was upheld until several years after the Civil Rights Movement. This is a good point to talk about the book that I mentioned earlier. If you're going to go to Savannah or you listen to this episode and you're interested, I would highly recommend reading or listening to the book Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil by John Berendt. It takes place in the 70s, is a true story. And within this book, he actually really talks about the remnants of the racial segregation and the racism that still existed in Savannah in the 70s. And it gives you insight into the different sections of Savannah's kind of cultural hierarchy and the type of people that you encounter there. I found it to be a really accurate picture of what I experienced there. And it has a lot of conversation around the white and black divide in Savannah in that time. So that would have been post civil rights, but really still waiting to enact some of that change. At the turn of the 20th century, cotton again became king, along with the added industries of exporting lumber and resin. When an outbreak of boll weevils, a beetle that lays its eggs in cotton bolls and destroys the cotton and surrounding fibers, Savannah's economy was crushed. And then, so was everyone else's with the onset of the Great Depression. So a boll weevil is a little beetle that they burrow into cotton balls. That's where they like to make their nests. And they were a chronic issue in the South. They would destroy entire cotton crops. And the boll weevil actually helped influence crop rotation. So at the time, farmers, we didn't really know any better. We didn't know that much about soil science. But they would plant the same crop over and over and over and over and over. And what happens when you do that? I grew up on a cattle ranch, and so I learned a lot about ranching and farming. When you do that, you deplete the soil of nutrients needed for that specific crop, and eventually the soil kind of becomes dead and you have to rest it. But if you rotate your crops, so if you plant cotton and then you plant tobacco and then you plant soybeans and you rotate, it allows the nutrients to kind of stay fresh and to keep the soil fertile. So because the boll weevils showed up and they kept wiping out the cotton crops, they started to bring in different crops in order to make money, in order to, further industry. And the funny thing about the boll weevil, which sounds so archaic, right? It's like the boll weevil. It sounds like a dust bowl, right? Like, what? What do you mean? They actually weren't eradicated until 1978. There was a huge push in the 70s to finally get rid of them as a pest. And in 1978 was when they initiated this, and then they were able to eradicate them completely. But the boll weevil and the work of George Washington Carver, who invented peanut butter, really influenced crop rotation to keep soil healthy and prevent pestilence like this from wiping out entire industries. Savannah's economy received a resurgence due to World War II. As a key port city for supplies and export, materials needed for the war created jobs and, most importantly, revenue. In 1955, a group of women founded the historic Savannah Foundation in an effort to preserve Savannah and its architecture. This group is largely responsible for the Savannah that you see today. The beautiful, frozen in time timepiece is the direct result of what the work that these women did starting in 1955. And it's a reason that so many of the original houses and structures are still there. Many of the buildings that we discuss in today's travel portion were saved due to these women's efforts, and now it's just a community of people who continue to preserve Savannah. And so that's just the brief history, and I wanted to include that because I didn't know anything about Savannah. I'd never been there, didn't know anything about it, had no idea. So I wanted to include that. And before we get into the interesting, legendary, spooky part of today's episode, I'm going to use this time for our mid-show sponsor break. Today's episode is brought to you by Nashville for Nobody's podcast. I'm actually recording my episode in their studio. That's where I am right now. This is a podcast hosted by Bobby Gordon along with co-host Kyle Thurkey, and they discuss the Nashville music scene, the ins and outs of Lower Broadway, and the lives of active musicians in the Nashville area. Nashville for Nobodies interviews local touring and studio musicians, as well as other music industry professionals. If you want to hear my interview, you can find it in Season 2, Episode 11. Highway to Hell is also brought to you by Intravenous Solutions, Nashville's premier IV therapy and wellness center. IV therapy can help you recover quicker from heavier workouts, illness, treat the symptoms of dehydration, and improve sleep and give you quality, glowing, healthy skin. Being on stage several times a week, as well as running a full-time personal training business and now podcasting, I can say that IV treatments, they keep me on my feet. They're really a lifesaver. They've also done worlds of good to treat my migraines. It's made such a big difference. Dr. Allen and his staff are so kind and so knowledgeable, and they make sure that every appointment is welcoming and easy. They also offer vitamin shots, oxygen therapy, Botox, filler, weight management, and even mobile services. With 4 locations in Nashville, Hendersonville, Franklin, and their brand new location on 2nd Avenue in Bankers Alley Hotel, it is easy to get high quality care all week. So come party in Nashville, come see my band, hang out with me, let's get drunk, and beat the hangover at Intravenous Solutions. If you give the code Monty10 at checkout, you'll receive a 10% discount on all services. Now that's a little early in the episode for a sponsor break, but it seemed to be the least intrusive spot for me to do that. Moving forward, I'm going to tell you 3 of my favorite haunted legends from Savannah and discuss real life encounters with them, including myself. This part of this show in general is going to have a lot of pictures and video. So if you're listening on Spotify or Apple, you can always go to my YouTube channel. It's just my name, Monty Mader. I'm going to be putting up socials specifically for Highway to Hell soon, but I haven't done that. But if you want to actually see the images or the video, you can go watch the video there, or I will be describing it to you so you can picture it in your mind. So first, let's talk about the legend of Alice Riley. She is the most famous ghost in Savannah. In the fall of 1733, an unmarked ship sailed into Savannah's harbor. She was greeted by armed men who demanded that she declare herself. They were greeted by pale, malnourished Irishmen and women who simply asked, "Is this Boston?" The ship of indentured servants fleeing famine in Ireland had been struck with illness so severe that the entire crew was dead. The servants, having no knowledge how to navigate a ship, drifted off their course to Massachusetts and instead landed in Savannah. Well, Savannah did need workers. So James Oglethorpe, Savannah's founder, bought out all of their indentured servitude contracts and assigned them to work their 7 years in Savannah. On that boat was a 15-year-old named Alice Riley and her common-law husband, Richard White. They had escaped famine, survived the voyage, but ultimately they would not survive William Wise. William Wise had arrived in Savannah on December 16, 1733. He was wealthy, but immediately disliked. He was cruel to his servants, and he was crass. The young girl that he introduced to people as his daughter was a 14-year-old prostitute he had brought over from England. Savannah hated him immediately. He was considered vile and of unimpressive character, and they would not allow him to settle within the city itself. Instead, he was forced to settle across the river on a small island to raise cattle. When Alice and Richard's contracts were bought out by Oglethorpe, they were assigned to William Wise. Alice and Richard were forced to care for William's hygiene. Alice was forced to bathe him by hand. Wise would make lewd comments and exhibit crude behavior towards her every time she bathed him, within sight and earshot of her husband, who was assigned to take care of his very long hair. There was no way she would endure 7 years of this. When she prepared his bath, she held a bucket of water over the flame until it just began to boil. And then she took it inside. She and Richard poured the burning water onto his face before holding his head under the boiling water until he drowned. In a letter written to James Oglethorpe while he was in England, the details of how the crime was assumed to play out were written this way. Wise was murdered and his personal effects stolen, presumed by the murderer. Alice Riley, under the direction and influence of White, set a pail of water down by Wise's bed while White began to pretend to assist and comb his hair. White then grabbed the neckerchief and twisted it till he almost suffocated. Alice Riley at the same time took hold of the pole of his head, the back of his head, and plunged his face into the pail of water, and he, being very weak, it soon dispatched him. And to the rest, I refer to the proceedings of the court. So basically, White and Riley did it together. She brought in the water. He grabbed his scarf. Neckerchief is such a weird word. Grabs his scarf, they pull him down and drown him manually in this bucket. They immediately fled but were soon recaptured on the Island of Hope and brought back to be tried and hanged for murder. In Savannah at those times, lawyers were illegal. So you were not allowed to practice law in Savannah. Lawyers weren't allowed to live there, really didn't like them. So guess what? You had to represent yourself, which is, of course, is great when you have a bunch of almost illiterate people, being on trial for crimes. Okay, it's fine. I'm not going to segue into that. They were both sentenced to death. Richard was hung first in Wright Square, and a fellow prisoner promised a more lenient sentence, kicked the latter out from under his feet on the gallows because Savannah had not yet appointed an executioner. So there's an interesting little factoid about jail in Savannah. We think jail, we think building. They didn't have a building. They would basically chain you to the ground. And there would be a little tent for you to relieve yourself with a hole in the ground. But you were chained to the ground. And Savannah has these giant, demonic, cousin of a cicada bugs that I can't remember what they're called, that would literally be all over your body. And you are just outside, chained to the ground. So when they didn't have an executioner, they go to a prisoner and they're like, hey, bro, we're going to let you off early and we're going to unchain you from the ground if you'll kick the ladder out from under this guy. Can't blame him. I really can't. I would do it too. I would do it too. But it's also important to keep what jail means in this context for the next part of this story. So Richard is killed. Another prisoner operates as the executioner. When Alice was brought to be hanged, she begged for mercy, if not for herself, for her unborn child, William Wise's child. Savannah residents did not want to hang a pregnant woman, and they held her in prison, chained to the ground, throughout her pregnancy. When the baby James was born, he was scooped away in a blanket. Alice was never allowed to see or touch him, and after recovering from labor, she was hanged on January 19th, 1735. Alice's body was left on the gallows for 3 days, an example to the citizens in Savannah about murder. Alice was the first woman to be hanged in Georgia, and her baby followed her in death 45 days later from malnourishment. She and the baby are both buried off of Wright Square, her body directly in front of where the former coroner's office would be, and the exact location of baby James remains unidentified. The ghost of Alice Riley is actually the most documented ghost in Savannah. She's also one of the oldest, obviously. So Wright Square, which was the executioner's square, is where she's most often seen. So she comes out at night. Apparently this is so frequent that the police actually do get quite a few phone calls. People will see a woman in a dress. She's crying. She's hysterical. She can't find her baby. She's looking for her baby. And people will actually call Savannah PD and say, hey, there's a woman in Wright Square crying for her baby. She seems incredibly distressed. They note that she's wearing a very old looking dress, like a timepiece. She's also known to accost pregnant women or attempt to take children out of strollers if people are in Wright Square with a stroller, especially at night. So one of the cool things about Wright Square, and I'm going to include a picture of this, it's a little bit dark, so I'm going to explain it to you so that you can kind of, get a clear idea of what it is you're seeing. Okay, so if you're looking at this is a picture, and it's obviously of the ground. There's a paved brick section of the square. This is Wright Square. But if you look closely, there's a circle of brick, and there's a big X. This was exactly where the gallows were built, where people were executed. Wright Square was the executioner's square. This is where people would be hung. This is where public hangings would happen. And one of the interesting things about Savannah, I'm going to show you a different picture for this, for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about when I reference Spanish moss. So this is a picture that I took of Colonial Cemetery, and if you look at the trees, that kind of hanging mass, that moss, is Spanish moss. It grows from the trees, it drapes down, it propagates through the air. So the wind blows the seeds, it spreads to other trees, which is why it's all over Savannah. So in Wright Square, all of the squares are covered in Spanish moss. So Savannah is blanketed in this. When you're standing at that gallows point in Wright Square, where the gallows would be, if you look into the square, deeper into the square, there's Spanish moss everywhere, but it stops right where that gallows point is. It will not grow. It will not grow over that point. It will not grow near it. It will not grow past it. It is one of the only sections of Savannah that I passed that didn't have Spanish moss. And the legend is, what Native Americans have said, is that Spanish moss will not grow over ground where innocent blood has been spilled. Just an interesting little tidbit. That's the legend of Alice Riley. So if you go down and you go to Wright Square in the middle of the night, maybe 3 a.m., you might see a woman who's looking for her baby. We're going to talk about the Sorrel-Weed House, which was one of my favorite encounters. I have some stories about this one. On the edge of Madison Square sits a very old mansion. The mansion is rumored to be one of the most haunted homes in the country, and certainly of the South, the Sorrel-Weed House. Francis Sorrel was born in Santo Domingo on May 4th, 1793. His father was an infantry lieutenant and an engineer for the French Navy. His mother was a free black Haitian. Sorrel's mother died when he was a month old, and his father left Haiti in 1803 without his son, and he was never seen again. Sorrel got a job as a clerk to support himself and was eventually transferred to work in Baltimore before relocating to Savannah in 1819. He started his own sales firm with a former employee named Henry Douglas, selling whiskey, butter, corn, and flour. But they also sold people. A wealthy and enterprising young man of 29, it was deemed improper and strange that he was still unmarried. So in September of 1822, he married Lucinda Ireland Moxley, the daughter of a wealthy Virginian family, and in doing so gained a large portion of their wealth due to his marriage to their daughter. His marriage also allowed him to officially become a citizen of the United States, and he was naturalized in July of 1824 in Savannah. Lucinda would die tragically from yellow fever in 1827, and he would then marry her younger sister Matilda, gross, in 1829. So basically what they think here is his goal was really, he probably would have remained unmarried if it hadn't been for societal pressure. He really seemed preoccupied with just making money. So he marries baby sister because instead of having to go find another wife, if he marries the younger sister, he gets another, I believe, sixth of their wealth for marrying her. So he's like, great, more money, new wife, done, check. Sorrel bought property in Savannah and began construction of the Sorrel House in 1835. It was completed in 1840. The home was an expression of his wealth and a place to store his slaves that he continued to trade. The beginning of paranormal activity seems to revolve around the death of Matilda. Interracial relationships were strictly forbidden in Savannah. A young black man would be hung for sleeping with a white woman cast out for such a relationship. They certainly couldn't be married. That wouldn't be made legal until the case of Loving versus Virginia in 1967. But it was very common for white slave owners to rape and impregnate their black slaves. Francis Sorrel began a coerced affair with a slave woman named Molly, who was either based on documentation, a 28-year-old slave who appeared on one of his trade manifests in 1857, or she was a young slave of his neighbor Charles Green. In 1859 or 1860, sources differ on that a little bit, Matilda not only discovers the affair, but she walks in on it. And it was deemed a fit of lunacy. Matilda, who already suffered from melancholy, what we know today as depression, flung herself face first from a second-story window and died from her injuries. Molly, overcome with guilt and grief, committed suicide by hanging, which makes that story extra tragic because it wasn't Molly's fault. But Molly felt like it was, and she ended up committing suicide in the family's carriage house. After her death, the house was sold to Henry D. Weed, a man remarked for his passion of cigars and pipe tobacco. His family owned the home until 1914 when they lost it in bankruptcy. So you can tour the Sorrel-Weed House, and I would highly, highly recommend it. Which I did, and it's a beautiful home. It's been just immaculately restored. And what I'll say is, I came into the lower level and they're giving you the history and this is what this room used to be. And when we get, there's two parlors because the women would have a parlor where the women would socialize. The men would have a parlor. And I walk in and I'm like, man, it smells like cigars in here, like really strong. And I'm like, I can't imagine that they let anyone smoke in here. But as the tour guide's talking, she's like, some people remark that they can smell Weed's tobacco in here. And I was like, okay, I actually do genuinely smell tobacco. And in these same parlors, there's these two huge, beautiful, ornate mirrors. They're gold framed. They're massive. They're not originally from the house, but they're time appropriate. They would be what would have been hanging there. And I decided to take a couple pictures of with the mirror and in the room. It was just really pretty. And in this room, especially on this level, people have rumored to see orbs, shadows. People have taken pictures of people who aren't there, who aren't in their tour group. And let me show you what happened to me. So this is a picture of the mirror. You can see it's really beautiful. There's a woman from my group standing in front of me. You can see the bottom white crystals of the chandelier. And it's just me taking a photo of trying to capture the room, and also because if you listen to paranormal investigations, you know a lot about it. Mirrors tend to be portals. They seem to have something where things can get trapped, allowed in, allowed out. So this is just this picture I took. And I took another picture immediately following. And again, if you're listening to this, I'm going to describe it to you. So first of all, take a second and look at that photo if you're actually watching it. There's a door behind me that's open. It's been open the whole time. It was open in my first picture. But there is a person leaning in past the door frame. It looks like their eyes are glowing. And I zoomed in on this picture. That person was not on our tour. Whoever that is was not someone who was with our group. And myself and this woman who is in front of me are the only two people standing in this room. And my third picture was identical to the first one. There was nobody standing behind me. And the spookiest thing happened to me when we went to the basement. The basement of the Sorrel-Weed House has a few historical important notes to make. So this would have been where the kitchens were, where the slaves worked. There was also a point where Henry Weed's son operated a surgeon's office. He was a doctor, and he was actually a very successful doctor in that time frame. His success rate was 50-50, which was apparently a winning score back then. So one side of the room is a surgery. Then there's the big area of the kitchens where this old fireplace is and the slaves would work there. There's a back hallway which would have been used for storage and a pantry. And we were told that there's a few ghosts that lives down there. And of course, I understand going into these haunted tours, they want to make it as spooky as possible. I get it. I get it. Make your money. I'm not throwing shade. There's supposed to be a little girl who died in the house. Her name was Sarah. She was one of the daughters of Matilda. She's said to be incredibly playful. She'll grab your ankle or grab your clothes. And in the surgery, people tend to feel a lot of negative energy, people in pain, people suffering. There's also a spirit in there that likes to steal things. So before we entered this part of the haunting, they were like, listen, if you have earrings that you value or car keys, put them in your bag because they will vanish. Apparently the week before, a woman had her car keys hanging out of her jeans pocket, and the tour guide's like, you might want to put those in. She's like, no, it'll be fine. Her car keys went missing. The entire staff tear the entire house apart, even the floors that are not accessible. Cannot find her keys. She ended up having to call a locksmith to get into her car because this little ghostie likes to take things. For me, I felt nothing. I felt nothing. Except there was that back hallway. And I kept feeling like there was something behind me. And I kept looking over my shoulder and I was like, what is that? Like, why do I want to go over there? But why do I also feel like something's watching me? And I asked the tour guide about the back hallway, and she's like, oh, like there is an entity, someone back there that we call the Shadow Man. Recently, we've brought in a psychic who says that his name is John. He's likely a British soldier. So, and I'll give you more of the history of why a British soldier would be there. So towards again, there's that slave kitchen area. And again, this is back in a time where slaves weren't considered to be people, they were property. And there's documented accounts of slaves reporting that they would see apparitions. And they called them demons because that's what they thought they were. And they noted that all the apparitions had white legs and red tails, like white socks and red coat tails. And it turns out that the Sorrel-Weed House was built on a very key medical area during the siege of Savannah. The British soldiers, it was a hospital. So it seems to be that the slaves were seeing apparitions of British soldiers. So everybody's leaving the basement. We're leaving the house. We're going to go to the carriage house. And I'm like, I have to go to this hallway. I have to go to and this hallway is creepy. Like they've definitely done the Halloween lighting. And there's a chair in there. And I'm the kind of person that I am a delighted skeptic of the paranormal, right? I know most of it's not real. But I also think it's arrogant to think that there are things that we can explain everything, right? I know we can't. So for me, it's like if every logical explanation has been exhausted, then yes, let's talk about it. But I also come in with respect. I do believe in demonic power. I do believe in dark entities. So I'm not going to do something to piss something off. Just, on the off chance it's real. So I go back to this spooky hallway. I'm going to show you this picture in a second. And there's a chair in the end of the hallway. I walk in the hallway and I say, hey, John, I would really like to take a picture of your hallway. I'm just going to sit in this chair really quick. And let me show you the picture because it'll make more sense. So here's the hallway. There's a lot of brick. It's very old. Obviously, they've got the spooky red lighting. It's very dark. There's no windows. This would have been like, again, a pantry area. They're trying to preserve things. They don't want it to get hot in there. But here's what happened. And I'm going to leave the picture up again. You can go to YouTube and take a look at this if you want. I go in there. I let John know I'm going to sit in his chair. I have my phone up in front of my face to take the picture. So I'm holding my phone with both hands. And I have my hair down. I have very long red hair, for those of you that don't know what I look like. I have long red hair, and it's down in front of me, in front of my chest, on the girls. I'm holding my phone in front of me, so I'm holding it with both my hands. And something walks up to me and pushes half my hair to my back. And I just freeze, and I'm like, okay. So ladies, you know this, like if a man comes up to you and he brushes your hair back to grab the back of your head, someone did that to me, but there was no one there. There was no wind. There was no windows. There's no doors in that area. There's no possible way for there to be anything. And both my hands are holding onto my phone. And I was like, okay. It didn't feel malicious. It felt very kind, but I was like, you know what, John, I gotta go. So I left with the rest of my tour group. So that was my experience with the Sorrel-Weed House. But even if you have no experience with it, you don't believe in any of this stuff, it's a beautiful tour. It's a beautiful home. There's a couple other places I'm going to mention in the travel portion that are also great. So my last kind of focus section for today, my last story, is going to be about the Savannah Theater. I'm going to tell this section a little bit differently. I'm going to discuss its history while weaving both the past and modern kind of encounters with entities and spirits in as I tell it. So it's going to be one storyline instead of segmented, just because with the theater it makes a little bit more sense, and I have pictures and video here. Also, I am including video here that includes spirit boxes, strobes, REM readers, all that kind of paranormal stuff. So just so you know, it's coming up. Just letting you know. The Savannah Theater is the oldest continually operating theater in the U.S. It was opened at 5:30 p.m. on December 4th, 1818, with a performance of The Soldier's Daughter. The 1818 structure was designed by British architect William J. It was home to notable performers such as Oscar Wilde, Sarah Bernhardt, W.C. Fields, and Edwin Booth, who performed in Shakespearean acts in 1876. Does his name sound familiar? Because it should. He is the younger brother of John Wilkes Booth. In 1827, as the lead actress exited the stage, her long train slipped into one of the gas lamps that lit the stage. A fire quickly consumed the stage area, and a local understudy named Elizabeth, who was one of the only local performers in the Savannah Theater, was trapped underneath the stage with two actors and was literally cooked to death, unable to escape the heat and the smoke. She's still frequently detected moving curtains, dancing across the stage, and loves when you applaud her. After a show opening, guests approached the director asking him who the woman in the hoop skirt was. There was no woman in a hoop skirt. But when they reviewed footage later, they were able to see what seemed to be the shadow of a woman who was smoking. You could see the smoke and see her shadow, but you couldn't see her. She's often referred to as Betty, Betsy, Lizzie. She is one of the most frequently encountered spirits in the Savannah Theater. I, as a performer, tried to connect with Lizzie and could not. Nothing happened. I tried to talk to her, tried to let her know that I sympathize and I was sorry that her career got cut short. But she was out for the night or did not want to talk to me, and that's okay. In the summer of 1898, a massive hurricane tore through Savannah. Homes and businesses were destroyed, floods damaged properties beyond repair, and the Savannah Theater took a real beating. The theater roof was torn off, and the auditorium was flooded. Massive repairs were extensive, and some of the setting was lost due to permanent water damage. Later, in 1948, the largest and most famous fire tore through the building. This time, the entire building was almost burned to the ground. In fact, the only part of the original structure that still stands is the back brick wall. That was the 1818 brick wall. Much of the theater was lost, and so it was rebuilt in the then popular Art Deco style, the theater that you see today. The lateral side seats were lost, as well as the expensive theater boxes. After the destruction, the theater was rebranded as a movie house. According to some local Savannah residents, the second fire occurred because of a curse that was placed on the theater. The curse was believed to be caused by a very unusual suspect, a penny. The penny was discovered when the theater was undergoing renovations. It was found stuck inside one of the old 1818 brick walls. From then on out, the theater's owner, Fred Wise, would carry the penny with him at all times, not as a memento, but for good luck. And it seemed that the penny did have the power of good fortune, but all of this was about to change because one day in 1948, Fred went on a trip to New York, and while he was there, he lost his lucky penny, and the next day the theater burned down. Another very famous resident of the Savannah Theater died in this fire. His name is Ben. He was approximately 9 or 10 years old, and he was on the balcony when the flames started, and as attendees were directed to exit, the young boy was caught in the crowd of people in the blacks only section, trying to get through the one door they were allowed to enter in, and he was trampled to death in the process. His father is also tied to the balcony. He also died there in his attempt to run back to the balcony and rescue his son. He died from smoke inhalation. Ben's ghost is now tied to the balcony in the afterlife, where he was sitting shortly before his life ended. Ben's spirit is known to bug the spotlight, pester technicians. He tugs on people's pants, asks them if they can move the light. He'll play with people's hair. He seems to be extremely playful, extremely friendly. He often rigs the equipment to malfunction to get a rise out of people, and is known to play with audience members. So I didn't have a personal encounter with Benjamin or his father, but one of the most famous videos from Savannah Theater from this particular investigation company, in fact, the voice that you might hear in the video is my investigative lead. His name is Micah. They have one of the craziest paranormal videos I've ever seen. This is going to be of the balcony area. I'm going to let you kind of listen and watch it. And there's not much audio, and I'm just going to describe it to you. But this, for me, this was the craziest thing that I saw the entire time I was there. For some of you that just shows up as spooky music, but what happens is they happen to have a camera that was facing the balcony door, which is where Benjamin would have died, in the stairwell just past that door. And they were taking down the videos for the night. And again, this is Micah. This happened to him. He's my lead. He was like, yeah, he's like, you can see my flashlight in the video because I'm downstairs putting equipment away. And they just happen to have this one camera facing the balcony that hadn't been taken down yet. And a humanoid shape materializes out of the door and runs across the balcony. Like, it's almost like a liquid person slides through the door and runs across. A person that happens to be just about the height of the railing. Crazy, crazy, crazy. There's one more ghost I want to talk about. One of the most active ghosts in Savannah Theater, besides Betsy and Ben, is Stephen. He primarily stays in the area that's off to stage right. Stephen worked as a stagehand in the Savannah Theater, and in the mid-90s, after a show wrapped up, Stephen used an iron ladder to secure a noose, and he hung himself backstage. He was discovered the next morning. His friend Charlie overdosed on barbiturates and died in the corner. Stephen is incredibly communicative and has a tendency to move things, knock things over. He's going to be someone that tries to scare you. I had a little interaction with Stephen I'll get into in a second. One of the psychic investigations where Stephen made himself known was near the ladder where he hung himself. The psychic was over there. She was talking to them about the brick wall because that ladder rests against that brick wall. And as she's talking, this is all on film, the ladder moves, and I mean moves several inches to the left. And this is on camera. She didn't touch it. There was nobody around her. Yeah. There's a few other things. If you Google the Savannah Theater and you start digging into these, you see shit getting knocked over, a hanger disappearing. That's Stephen. That's Stephen. He likes to play around. Okay. So when we first started the investigation, they give you the history. They do a walkthrough so you know where everything is, and you're kind of on your own. They give you like a night vision camera if you want it, EMF readers. We've like all kinds of like sensitive lights. There's a bell that you can get spirits to ring and ask them questions, and you can just record everything. Plus you have spirit boxes. We had everything. We had everything that you could want in a paranormal investigation at our disposal. But as we're doing the walkthrough, we go into that stage right area where Stephen is, and they already have equipment set up for you as well as the equipment that you'll carry by hand. Immediately, Stephen starts interacting with our other lead, and he's saying things through the spirit box, or he calls her by name. Her name is Kat, and he was like, "Hey, Kat," and I'm just like, what is happening? But for me, later on, we came back to visit Stephen. Now, Stephen was running around the stage and in stage right, setting off lights, ringing a bell a bunch of times, making our equipment was blowing up. We were just like, what is happening? And then he just kind of disappeared. We went back to the stage right area to really try to get a response from him, myself, and my group. And he kind of went silent, and he was like, didn't want to talk to us. Kat comes in, and she's sitting with us, and she's like, this is weird. She's like, this is always one of the most active areas. So I'm like, okay, Stephen died in the mid-90s. Obviously troubled, something was going on. But I was like, why don't we try to figure out what kind of music Stephen liked? And so we pull up a Spotify playlist, and I wish I had this on tape because my phone had died. This was at the very end of our investigation. We had like 20 minutes left. And we start going through this playlist. We're like, okay, Stephen, so we have this bell, like a concierge bell that they can ring. And that thing had been active. There's no explanation. I was standing in front of it, watching other people. There's no way that thing could ring on its own. There's no way. No way. But we have the bell in his room with Stephen, and we're like, okay, Stephen, like ring the bell or light up these EMF readers if you like this song. So we start with Nirvana, no response. Rage Against the Machine, no response. I think we did Pearl Jam, no response. But when we played this, Stephen lost his mind. The bell starts going off, shit's moving around us, things are lighting up and going off that we hadn't seen yet. We listened to the whole song with him, and then the spirit box started getting real light, like certain phrases of the song were coming through the box. So Stephen, the ghost of stage right, really likes Creep by Radiohead. Really likes it. And then at the very end of our investigation, there's a back area. There's a hallway that led to a back green room that would have been used by actors and actresses to get to and from stage. That hallway was so terrifying. I was like, I'm not going in there. I'm a G and I'm not. No. Something's in there. I don't like it. Doesn't feel good. But we went to this back green room area, which is in between two mirrors. So again, if you believe in the paranormal, you listen to paranormal investigations, mirrors can act as portals. So they can allow things in and out. And we come to this room, and this is the one section where I'm going to show you a video that I took. And it is unbelievable. We put the equipment there. We sat down, and everything starts lighting up like Christmas trees. And then if you watch the video closely, again, you'll have to see these on YouTube. I'm going to describe it to you. In one of the videos, as I'm filming the equipment going off, you see a shadow. I'm getting chills about talking about it. You see a shadow past the equipment walking into that hallway that would have led to stage. You're hearing all the equipment going off, and these are kind of they're sensors. So when things get close to them, they light up. They're making all this sound. There's noise coming through the spirit box, and then at the very end of my video, as I pan past the equipment, you see that shape move into the hallway. It was awesome and kind of terrifying, and I was like, okay, I think I'm good. I think, you know what? I believe you. I believe you. I've had enough. I need a snack. My phone's dead. Can I go home? And that is our spooky story collection from Savannah. I hope that you enjoyed that kind of take on Savannah as much as I did. It was really fun. It was kind of a nice break from the true crime. There's so many other stories to include, little tidbits of which I'll get into in the travel portion, but there's absolutely no way that I could include them in one podcast. But before we move into the travel portion, let's recap today's episode with our highway highlights. Number 1, Savannah was established by General James Edward Oglethorpe, who founded Georgia, the 13th colony of the United States, and Savannah on February 12, 1722. Georgia was named after King England's King George II. Also, interesting to note with all these hauntings that Georgia was the 13th colony, and Oglethorpe was from a part of London that was called Gravesend. Anyways, number 2, Savannah's strategic position as a port city created a pivotal role in the Revolutionary and Civil Wars, though for the Civil War the city remained relatively undamaged when it was surrendered to General Sherman under the condition that the city would not be burned. Due to wars, lower life expectancy, 2 outbreaks of yellow fever, one of which killed 1 in every 6 citizens, Savannah is what we call a necropolis. Many of its expansive cemeteries were later paved over to make space for city development, and there are also several mass graves. Number 4, Savannah is one of the most haunted cities in the U.S., the most famous of which is 15-year-old Alice Riley, an Irish indentured servant who was the first woman hanged in Georgia after she and her husband murdered William Wise. Number 5, other haunted locations in Savannah include the Sorrel-Weed House, the Savannah Theater, several restaurants, inns including the Foley House, and restaurants including the Pirate House. All right, and now we are on the travel portion of Savannah, and I said earlier that this was my first time in Savannah. It might honestly be one of my new favorite cities. I was just blown away by how beautiful it is, and also I am a sucker for a walkable city. When I don't have to get in my car for everything I want to do, I'm very pleased by this. I lived in New York City for a long time. That makes me very happy. Savannah is very much a tourist destination, and certain spaces, it definitely has a little bit kind of that old money kind of feel to it, but you can definitely still travel to Savannah on a budget. Again, my goal with Highway to Hell is to help travel be accessible, whether it's me bringing stories and travel, bringing the cities to you, or encouraging you to go find the cities. First, let me say again, I highly recommend reading or listening to Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil by John Berendt before you go. It's a great book. It's a great story. It really gives you context for Savannah. Um, Ironically, and I didn't mean to do this because I rented an Airbnb there, I stayed on the same street that John Berent lived while he was researching and writing that book, or when he was living in Savannah and wrote the book as a result. So let's talk about housing first. If you Google Savannah hotels, they can be pretty expensive. And if you're on a budget, don't worry. I got you. I got you. Don't worry. You'll also find that there's a lot of local inns and B&Bs that are similar in price to the hotels and sometimes a little more. But here's something to know because I didn't know this. I did not book one of those inns because I'm like, man, it's the same as a hotel. What? Why? But a lot of the inns include a like homemade complimentary breakfast with coffee, free cocktails in the evening, sometimes during the day. They have snacks all day, concierge. There's like amenities. Plus, it might be haunted, which is kind of cool. The Foley Inn is one of those places. So the Foley Inn, the woman who owned it after her husband died, there was a man, a grifter, what's the word? A gigolo, if you will, came and he courted her and he wanted to marry her. And he proposes and she's like, let me think about it. And that night he tries to strangle her. So she beats him to death with a candlestick. But in Georgia, she knows, she's like, she can't call the cops. They're still gonna arrest her for murder and she'll be killed. So her and her son hide the man in a wall because her son happened to be a bricklayer. So the Foley Inn is super haunted. And also they didn't find that man's body until the 80s. They decided to tear down this part of the brick wall. They're like, that's weird. There should be light on the other side of that. And they found this man, the skeleton, with all his personal effects in the wall. Good for her. And then there's 1790 Inn. It has a haunted room called 204. If you want to stay, called 204, it's number 204. If you want to stay at 204, you got to book it way in advance. Basically, a woman was brought over from Europe for an arranged marriage. She fell in love with a sailor. And the legend is unclear whether she committed suicide because she could not be with the man she loved, or her new husband, enraged that she's fallen in love with another man, threw her out the window. Either one could happen. But it's a very active room, supposed to be very haunted hotel. Also has a really cute bar. Just letting you know. It's very important. I ended up staying in an Airbnb because the inn that was recommended to me, which was Planters Inn, was totally booked, and I chose to save the money. I stayed for $60 a night in the heart of Savannah, had a full kitchen, beautiful living room, so you can definitely do it on a budget. And there's other bigger Airbnbs. If you're coming with a group, you could save so much money. Anyways, I just wanted to talk about that because I didn't know that about the local inns, and I'm very big on support smaller local businesses if you can. So, just a little fun fact. Let's get to the good part. I am like fantasizing over some of the food that I ate here. I definitely gained like at least a full dress size in a week. I regret nothing. There was one night I ate 3 dinners. I will explain, but I regret nothing and I will not apologize. Today we're going to start with like the touristy things to see and do. Then we'll go to restaurants, bars, and some music from the area. I didn't get a chance to see any live music when I was in Savannah. It's just not as much of a hub, and I was there during the week. But I did find some really cool bands that are from Savannah that I'll talk about. So the first thing I'm going to recommend is a ghost tour. Highly, highly recommend this. They're walking tours. You'll get a feel for the city. The nighttime in Savannah, Georgia is just rich and yummy and beautiful. I would highly recommend taking one. Warning though, some of these companies can like embellish a lot of their stories. They get a little tall tale-ish. And I heard some of it walking around where people would say things where I'm like, I know that that's not historically accurate. But okay, I would highly recommend using the company Genteel and Bard. They are known, they have a very good reputation for giving you historical, verifiable stories, and they're pretty amazing. Like the tour guides are great, and the stories are great on their own. They really don't need to be embellished. I would do this first thing, like the first thing you do when you get there, book a night tour or a daytime tour if you have kids, and go listen to this. It gives you so much context, and it's going to help you kind of figure out, what do I really want to see? What houses do I want to go to? Things like that. I would tour the Sorrel-Weed House and the Mercer Williams House. Sorrel-Weed House is the one I told you about where the where John decided to fix my hair for me. And then the Mercer Williams house is the context of that book, Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil. It's where the man that was accused of murder lived. It's a beautiful home, beautiful home. And then number 3, if you're into it and you're not easily freaked out, I would do a paranormal investigation. Go with the company Truth and Evidence. They provide all the equipment for you. It's a little bit more expensive, but all the equipment's provided. And they do seem to be really genuine about like, we just want to know if this is real. We're not trying to convince you that it's real. We're just here. And when you come in, they let you know you may experience nothing. We can't guarantee that. I know that they do Savannah Theater. They do the Brewing Company, which I've heard is kind of like kind of scary haunted. Like, ooh, there's something in here that wants to hurt me. Versus Savannah, it's much more friendly, kind of playful. The theater, I mean, are much more playful, it seems to be. Those are my recommendations as far as like touristy things. Do it. You will love it. Also, I can't believe I forgot this in my notes. Bonaventure Cemetery. First, it's just beautiful. It's breathtaking. And actually our ghosty tour guide, she was like, yeah, I got married in the cemetery. I'm like, I think I love you. I think we're besties now. One of my favorite things that I loved was, if you've heard legends about, there was a time in America where people began to be very preoccupied about the fear of being buried alive. Because if you died from an illness or something people couldn't identify and you went into a coma, they might not actually realize that you're still alive. And you could wake up in a coffin or in a crypt and you can't get out. And this had happened before, and we know that because we've now seen coffins and crypts where it's very clear someone tried to claw their way out. But this really didn't become a phenomenon until 1844, when a certain horror author named Edgar Allan Poe released a short story called The Premature Burial. Now, this took America by storm. People were freaked out, and they were like, I don't want to get buried alive. So that's when they started using the bells, and you might have heard of this. So what they would do is when they buried you, they would tie a string to your wrist or your ankle, and it would go up to the surface, and it would be attached to a bell. So if you woke up and you weren't actually dead, you could ring the graveyard keepers to come dig you out, which is terrifying. Like, it's terrifying that people are like, okay, I need to make sure I've got my will. It's notarized. I need to have a bell. Anyways, I will say that in Bonaventure Cemetery is one of the only existing bells that's still operational. And it's next to this man's grave. And the reason that it's one of the only ones that still exists is a lot of those bells were made of copper. And in the wars, World War I and World War II, when they needed supplies, they needed, like a lot of those, they were made of copper and tin. So they would be taken, they'd be melted down and used for supplies. This man was so paranoid about his bell working that he insisted it be cast in bronze. And because he had his bell cast in bronze, it's still there. It's in Bonaventure Cemetery. 10 out of 10 would recommend. Now, we're going to go to the food. Oh my God. Fitness people. I run a personal training business. I've lost 90 pounds. People that love the gym. Plan your cheat meals here. Do it here. You have to find the balance of my body is a temple and you only live once. You got to be in the middle. This is the time to go to you only live once. This is the time. I'm going to do a little reverse ordering with this. I'm going to go from bottom to top with my favorite recommendation last so I can gush over it a little bit. And I have a few more restaurants than normal because the food here was incredible. A little surprise one, Rancho Alegre Cuban restaurant. I just found this. I wanted somewhere for lunch that was not Southern food, that I could take a break. This was toward the end of my trip. And this ended up being some of the best Cuban food I've ever had. And I thought, oh, I'll go here. I'll get a sandwich, maybe a little side, and it'll be this light lunch. That sandwich was two halves, the size of my face. And if you know me in person, I have a huge head. I had 2 head-sized pieces of a sandwich that lasted me like 4 meals. And it was like $15. Loved it. It was so delicious. Collins Quarter, go here for brunch. Some of the best brunch I've ever had. I had like this short rib hash that was just delicious. The coffee is immaculate, and they have incredible Bloody Marys. It's not on their menu anymore, but they have what's called an everything Bloody Mary that is like literally everything. It's like got bacon and a jalapeno and some other breakfast stuff, and it's just go ask them for it. Ask nicely. I'm sure they'll do it for you. The Public Kitchen and Bar. So I went to this restaurant for a reason. When I was doing my initial research of Savannah, I was just looking at reviews, reading Reddit. I rely on Reddit for local recommendations, let me tell you. And everyone kept saying, this is the best shrimp and grits you'll ever had. I was like, I went to college in the South. I've spent a lot of time in New Orleans. I was like, is it though? Is it? Is it? Turns out it is. So if you like shrimp and grits, go to the Public Kitchen and Bar. It is the best shrimp and grits I have ever tasted. And it's not close. It's not close. Whatever this was heaven. And I was willing to sacrifice feeling like a beached whale to eat the entire plate and use bread. I used delightful sourdough bread to wipe the plate clean like a savage. It was so good. Oh my God, it was so good. Number 2, the Gray. So the Gray this is a fine dining restaurant. So this is for date night, anniversaries, treat yourself. It's a restaurant built in an old Greyhound station, and you can still tell that it's a station. It's a beautiful setting, really incredible. The food it is very clearly fine dining, and it is exquisite. I had sweetbreads for the first time, which if you don't know what those are, I'm just not going to tell you. I'll let you Google that for your own enrichment. They were delicious. And I went in there by myself, dressed up, and I'm just people watching. There was this really young couple that it was clearly their first like fancy date together. And they were so awkward. It was adorable. It just made my dinner that much better. This restaurant is great. If you want just a really delicious kind of higher end meal, cannot recommend the Gray enough. Everything I tasted, everything I saw looked amazing. And the staff was so helpful because I asked my waitress, I'm like, hey, do you know any places that do this or this or this? And literally the staff all sat down on postcards and gave me their own recommendations. It was really nice. Let's talk about my favorite. This one's my favorite. It's called the Old Pink House. And this is another place that you have to have a reservation and you have to get it months in advance. But fear not. If you're like, I'm going to Savannah next week, I didn't know. Same here. I didn't know either. Turns out there's a downstairs bar area that you can order food and drinks, and it's walk-in, it's first come, first serve. So the Old Pink House is, it was built in the 1800s like a lot of things were, and it was a brick house that the owner wanted to cover with plaster, but the bricks, because of the humidity, kept bleeding through the plaster, and it turned the house pink, and he was actually pretty embarrassed about it. I think it looks amazing, but men, 1800s, thing. But so I went there the first night I was there. I was like, let me go to the Pink House and get a cocktail. So I go to the Pink House, and it's a restaurant within a mansion, as most of the places are in Savannah. And the first thing I see is this bachelorette party. They're all dressed as 1920s flappers. I'm like, you girls look amazing. Congratulations. They're like, can you take our picture? I end up standing outside of the Old Pink House taking pictures for like 15, 20 minutes. And then I was able to sneak into a restaurant by pretending I was the daughter of this older couple in front of me, and nobody questioned me. So I got to explore the restaurant, which was great. But then I went downstairs, and when you go into the downstairs where you can it's first come, first serve, like cocktails and food, it feels like you're in the bottom of a ship. And the cocktails are so good, and I did order dinner that night. I got a fried pork chop, which I don't eat fried pork chops. I ate the entire fried pork chop and the sides, and it was delicious. I was like, I cannot live in this city because I would be 1,800 pounds. What is going on? But then my last night, I took myself to the Gray because I'm a fancy bitch. And after I was like, you know what? I just want one more drink at the Old Pink House. That's been my favorite place. So I went back. I ended up sitting next to a group of people because it's first come, first serve. And I'm just having my drink. And I ended up making friends with them. And they're like, we have dinner reservations in like 20 minutes. You want to go? I was like, of course I do. Because I didn't get to eat upstairs yet. So I go and have a second dinner with them. And I had scallops and ceviche, and it was incredible. It was incredible. And then I ended up taking them on kind of a mini tour of Savannah of what I'd already seen because they hadn't explored yet. And they're like, one of them gave me her earrings. She's like, these are for good luck. And I'm like, okay, I don't know why. Okay, fine. And then I went home and ate the other half of that face-size sandwich. So I had 3 dinners in one. I was like, you know what? We're just going for it. There's so many. It's so good. The Old Pink House was by far, and there were certain places I didn't try, but on my trip, the Old Pink House was far and away the best food, drinks, atmosphere. If you go to the downstairs bar, ask for TJ. He's adorable. He's got glasses, bartender. He's the best. Tell him Monty sent you. I told him specifically I was going to shout him out on the podcast and send people to him. So please do that and don't let me down. Okay, great. So let's talk about standalone bars. Because a lot of these places are restaurants with great drinks as well. Artillery. This place is beautiful. It's like opulent and gilded, and they have this it's a savory cocktail called the Chokehold, which I was like, that sounds weird. It's scotch and like bay leaf notes, and it is so good. I was like, what is happening? I think, what is going on? They also have one called the Brass Monkey. Now, in most situations, I do not like banana. I will eat a banana. I will eat banana bread. I do not like banana flavored things. Just like Laffy Taffies. That's gross. Stop it. Quit. The Brass Monkey is Makers, banana, and chocolate in a cocktail, and it is really good. I'm like, people kept telling me to try it. I'm like, I don't really like banana. But I tried it, and I'm glad I did. It was delicious. Something to know about Artillery. They have a dress code. This is a dress to impress bar. They will not let you in with flip-flops, sleeveless shirts. You need to treat yourself. Treat yourself. Second is Lone Wolf Lounge. It's like time traveling to the 1970s. It feels like the 1970s in there. It's a Caribbean theme. There's a drink called the Rock Over London. I love Negronis. You saw me drink a Negroni in the American Mafia episode. I love a Negroni. They're so good. They have one called Rock Over London, which is like their spin on it. Very tasty. They also seem to have some very nice looking margaritas, which I didn't drink that night. And then the Sixpence Pub. I ended up going in there when I was waiting for my paranormal investigation. And what I loved about it, I lived in London very briefly, and I love a pub. I love the culture of pubs that London has. London and Ireland and Scotland have it. And this place really felt like a British pub. Most of the beers are from overseas. Like, it was just very, and like hearty bar food. Like, you're going to get bangers and mash and fish and chips and things like that. Just great, kind of nostalgic for me kind of place. It was really great. Highly recommend. Let's talk about music. Again, I didn't get to see any live music while I was there. Apparently Billy Strings had a show while I was there, but I didn't find out till the last minute. When I was researching bands that were from Savannah, I was kind of surprised. I expected a lot of country, a lot of like bluesy jazz. That's just I don't know why. That's just what my brain said was going to happen. I found incredible. So I'll just give you an example. McLeod is a band that's very popular from there, and it's this super ethereal, dreamy pop. Beautiful. But also I discovered that Savannah has a pretty intense punk scene, which was I just didn't expect that considering the vibe and the history. There's a great hardcore scene. And of course there is some country and some soulful, and there's a couple really great hip hop artists as well. So there's like a hip hop scene. I know a lot of it. I talked to some locals and they're like, well, like our music scene used to be a lot better before COVID, as a lot of people. And because Savannah's a mid-sized town, it's not a big city. It's just kind of coming back slower. But McLeod is this beautiful, dreamy pop. If you're like just wanting to zen out and just feel good, I recommend. Baroness is like this heavy alternative. It's like this sludgy punk. It's really cool. I'm actually kind of surprised with my musical taste that I've never heard of them. And a band very similar to that is Kailisa. So if you like kind of punky, heavy, aggressive, but it's not quite fully metal, that's your vibe. And it'll be on my playlist. Every week on Mondays, I release a playlist of each city, and some places are going to have famous artists on them, and some places like Savannah is going to be mostly local artists. I discovered an artist while I was doing this research named Camoflauge, hip-hop artist, gives me really cool early 2000s hip-hop vibes, and I was kind of surprised that, one, I had never heard of him, and that he wasn't bigger than he, because again, I haven't heard of him. But unfortunately, he was murdered outside of Pure Pain Records in 2003. So hence the frozen in time early 2000s hip hop. It's really good. It's really, really well done. So I put his songs on the playlist. It's got this like Boys in the Hood kind of feel to it, but his tone, he's got like some Andre 3000 things that he does with his cadence and tone that I really liked. And then a band that was recommended to me by my friend Brendan in Nashville, they half the band is from New Orleans, half the band is from Savannah. They're called Neutral Snap. And very cool pop punk, but like really good songwriting. I guess it would be pop punk. That's how I would classify it. But really good songwriting, pretty strong following. Was really glad that my friend Brendan showed me these guys because again, there's just so much good music in the world. And then there's a band. I thought this was a person. It's a band called Donna Savage. And I thought, oh, that's this woman. No, it's a group of dudes, I think. I couldn't find any actual pictures of them. They have really cool and strange artwork that they use for their their promotional posters and their EP covers, but it's not some chick singing into a mic. It's punky and it's unexpected and it's aggressive. It's really cool. This was a Reddit discovery. I was really glad that the local Savannans were like, hey, listen, so many people said Donna Savage, and I was like, oh, who is this girl? It's not. We made it. We made it down the road to one more city. This went a little bit longer than I planned, but not too much. I've kind of found that 20 pages of script is where I need to stop. But this one, there was just so many stories that it was hard for me to shut up. As per the usual, please share this with people. Let people know that this podcast exists. Please rate, review, subscribe. Those little free things help me so much. It helps me appear in playlists. It helps other people find it, and eventually can create something so much bigger. Thank you so much for rolling down the highway with me. We're going to get off the road for now. I actually am going to take this American Horror Story witchy outfit on stage in Nashville right now. I'm going to Whiskey Row tonight, and I cannot wait to see you. So the next Highway to Hell episode, I'm not announcing. It's going to be a surprise, and I will see you next week on the Highway to Hell.